Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. This is episode 62. You can reach us at our email, which is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. You can also find us we have a private Facebook page, which is 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. Get on there and send us a request. We'd love to add you to the page. You can also find us on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podomatic, and I want to make a few quick little announcements. This upcoming Sunday, which is August 31st, we're starting a new series with Jerry P. from Washington. We're going to be going through the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 Traditions, and Jerry has been I got the suggestion from a really, really close buddy of mine, which I look up to. I'm super excited about this series. I don't know how to pronounce the area that he's in Washington, but I'll find that out whenever he comes on the show. Also, we have the following Monday, which is September 1st. We have Renee E. from Lebanon, Tennessee. Renee is going to be doing steps 10 and 11 with me, and we're calling it Carrying the Vision of God's Will in All Our Activities. Super excited about that. And then tonight's guest, I am super stoked about it. We have Jane W. from Nashville, Tennessee. How you doing, Jane?
I am pretty great. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Stephen T. is how me and you actually met. You I think you and Steve used to be home group members, correct?
Yeah, we used to attend the same meeting, yeah.
Yeah, nice. I remember the first time I'd reached out to you was about, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago. I was doing a traditions workshop, trying to put one together, and you weren't able to do it. Our schedules had conflicted, but yeah, that's when I first heard he'd tell me about you. How's everything going with you, Jane?
It's going really well. You're actually in my phone as Paul Traditions. I don't know if I've ever told you that.
Yeah, that's funny. I got you in mine as Jane Traditions. Yeah.
Incredible.
Hey, but that's not a bad thing. That's actually
No, I think that's great.
Yeah. I was just thinking when I was writing down on my little paper right here the announcements for the upcoming stuff. It's like the listeners are probably like, "Oh man, another Traditions thing," because I've had like 3 or 4 of them so far. Right?
Yeah. They're so good, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It adds so much, right, for me.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I really think I know that I'm not here to talk about the traditions, but I got sober and worked the steps and had a spiritual experience, and I think based on that, I would have been able to live in my own skin pretty well for the rest of my life if nobody ever talked to me. As soon as I have to interact with other people or be a part of a group, I need the traditions too.
Nice, yeah, wow, that's great. So, how's everything going with you?
Oh, it's pretty good. It's we're getting some cooler weather, which is gorgeous. Yeah. And my home group's doing a big book study. So we're in the family afterward, which is always a little bit clunky and a little bit funny. And it's nice to hear a lot of perspectives on that.
Yeah. I was reading some of the family after. Some of it's just outright just hilarious, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yes, it is. We got to a paragraph yesterday actually that was about sexual relations after getting sober, and it's just always so funny to watch the giggles go around. This is a room full of adults and everybody's tee-heeing because we're talking about sex. Is marvelous.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I tell you, we've been discussing, we've been talking about the podcast stuff. We've only talked a handful of times, but it's been 3 or 4 months now we've planned this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love that you picked inventory. It's it's not always everyone's favorite topic, but I've found it in my personal experience like vital over the last few years, especially, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I love that you decided that you wanted to do inventory. Also, for the listeners, next Wednesday we're going to do another episode. We're not sure what we're going to do yet. We're going to let God decide what we're going to do, but it's going to be Wednesday, September 3rd, and so we'll have Jane back on the show next week.
Yeah, it's going to depend what I end up talking about today. I think inventory can get paired with a bunch of other stuff, and so
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see what comes out this time, and then talk about something else next time.
Yeah, it's cool because I think that the common theme over the last probably 6 months to a year or so is that like I get that each step is numbered and has its own place, but it's just one big process, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's like it's all woven together. It's like I'm getting in the way. I don't have the power. I got to rightly relate myself to the power, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. And, I really believe, and it was really important to me in the beginning, especially to hear from people that like the steps are in order for a reason. So if you're not on 9, don't worry about 9. And if you're not on 4, don't worry about 4. But, I've been sober for a long time at this point. And, at this point I do inventory when I need to do inventory, and I say a prayer when I need to say a prayer, and I make an amend when I need to make an amend. And, I think it's possible to look at all of that as just 10, 11, and 12, but it's also possible to just, I guess, be a little bit less rigid about it. I think that's one of the big themes in my life lately, is being a little bit less rigid, even about how I do. Like, I can be serious about recovery without being rigid about recovery.
Nice. Yeah. That's awesome, man. Speaking of, what's your sobriety date?
January 1st, 2007. So 18 years.
Wow. January 1st.
Yeah.
Nice. 2000.
I know. I used to have a resentment about that sobriety date because I thought that people would think I wasn't a real alcoholic. I just made a New Year's resolution. And I mean, genuinely for years, I was like so embarrassed to tell anybody that was my sobriety date. And, eventually decided that I can grow up and not need to go out and get a better story and a different sobriety date.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's funny you said that. I get it. I could imagine. It's good stuff. All right, cool. Let's cool. I'm going to read a bit just to kind of get this rolling from the big book. And then we'll get rolling into some of the inventory stuff. You ready?
Yep.
For the listeners, this is the Alcoholics Anonymous book. We're going to start at page 63 and go into 64. I love this part of the book. It says, next, we launched on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged and unsellable goods, to get rid of them promptly without regret. The owner of a business was to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. This next little part right here, I remember when I actually read this and it had that was particular about 2 years ago. This right here really touched me. It said, we did exactly the same thing in our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failures, being convinced that self manifested in its various ways is what defeated us. So we considered its common manifestations. I'm going to stop right there. Yeah. There's a lot in that, right?
There's so much in that. The first thing that pops out to me, my first thought on inventory I want to share is of course, my first experience with inventory is step 4. And up until that point, I've been doing steps 1, 2, and 3. And I had a home group really early on, and they were really serious about the big book and the traditions and service and all kinds of stuff. And so I was seeing a lot of great examples around me of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was this one guy in that meeting who said he'd been sober for a zillion years. He's one of those grumpy old guys. And he said something really dismissive right before I was starting my 4th step about how newcomers just love the first 3 steps because they're the most important person in the room and it's all about them and there's nothing they really have to do. And then you ask them to do a 4th step and they just out they go. And he said it so disdainfully. And I really think that one of the streams of gasoline in my tank to get me through the 4th step was a resentment against that guy. So I was like, I'm going to do the best 4th step you have ever seen. Like, I am not going to be defeated by this grumpy old dude. And so, I think I've done some really great things and some bad motives, and sometimes that's all right. Did kind of help me get through it.
I get it. Yeah.
And then the other thing that jumps out about those paragraphs you read, and this is really important to me. It's one of the first. So I had a lot of fear around step 4 as well, just because sometimes we talk about it in meetings in a way that reflects a lot of fear, or that can kind of encourage a lot of fear. And so I was afraid of doing it, but I was more afraid of not doing it. Plus I was mad at that guy. So I was willing to do it. But one of the first things that made me relax a little bit was actually in one of those paragraphs you just read, where it says, taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. Yeah. And then in the next line, it says the truth. And I have those fact-finding, fact-facing, and the truth underlined, and in the margin I've written there, emotionally neutral and morally neutral. That was so important to me to get that like first new perspective on an inventory, that this is not about badness. It's not about wrongness and like finding my flaws and being grossed out and then squashing them in the ground or apologizing for them or something. Like there's going to be an element of some of that stuff, but really it's just about learning. It's just about finding some facts and identifying them. And like, if I had a dented can of corn, that's not I don't have a moral judgment about a dented can of corn. I just throw it away and I can approach some of my old ideas in the same way.
Nice. Man, I can relate to that. I love that. How you said that. What'd you say? Emotionally neutral?
Yeah. And morally neutral, both of those.
Nice. I tell you, for me, I think the first couple times I did inventory, I didn't really understand. It was more like we did the best we could. It was more like a confession type thing, right?
Yep.
But and then whenever that part I just read where it said to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Now it's like, oh man, this like when I realized the intent in this, it's like, oh, we're trying to figure out what's blocking us, right? Yeah. Which is completely changed the whole day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can read a little bit from page 66 as well, this is for me, like, the first time I did the 4th, of course, I was following directions, but like the longer I stay here and the more I practice this, the more it kind of roots itself in my heart and my mind, really. I just understand it in different and deeper ways. And it says on page 66, it is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? Yeah. And then toward the end of that paragraph, it says, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. Yeah. And when I did the 4th step the first time, I didn't really have a conscious contact with a higher power yet. I hadn't really experienced serenity yet. I'd had like little moments of a break from constant panic, and that was better than I'd experienced before. So, I wanted more of it, but I had not experienced peace. Yeah. And now that I've experienced peace and I look back on this, like I can really see, especially having meditation practice as well, like I can really actually watch my mind now in moments when, I have peace and then a thought comes into my mind that's a resentful thought or a fearful feeling. And I can feel myself no longer peaceful and no longer connected. And I love this idea that squandering hours, like those are actual hours of my life. This is this is time matters. And the earlier I do it, the faster I do it, the faster I get to peace. And I mean, that's what I wanted from alcohol, was like peace right this minute. And unfortunately, alcohol gave me like oblivion, which I settled for, but that's not the same as peace. And now I have access to peace, and I don't always get it right this minute, but my gosh, like the more work I do, the more quickly and, with the fullest heart I can, summon at the time, the closer I get to peace, the more peace I get.
Wow. I love that. I love how you said that. I can definitely relate to that. Charlie P always talked about, and listening to Charlie and Katie, like, just changed things for me for years. And he would talk about how he had a buddy that was a good bird watcher. And he was like, we could go out in the woods, and he had been doing it for so long. We could sit out there and he could just tell you all kinds of, you hear that, name like the different kind of birds. And he was like, this whole thing centers around the self piece, right? And like, how does self manifest in our life? How does self keep showing up in our life? And like, the more you get familiar with that, just like what you're saying, I love how you added the meditation practice to it too, because I'm in the same boat. Like, I started, getting into meditation probably 90 days in, and I'd gotten really deep into it for a while. And, when you start forming a relationship internally with yourself, you can start seeing it just changes the game, right? Yeah. And I tell you, like, you had touched on, like, how your body will react. You start seeing how you get an emotional contraction, and that's huge. It's huge.
Yeah, I love that. And and that's the 11th step too. Like, I think that's where I first heard the St. Francis prayer. I didn't grow up in a tradition that used that prayer, and so the version I'm familiar with really is the one from the 12 and 12, and the phrase in there is, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. Yeah. And I know there are other phrases, but that's I grew up with the AA one, and so the image of being a channel of the peace of a power greater than myself just made it like, once I had that idea, then I almost had a visual for what it looks like when the channel is blocked off. And like, what blocks that off, what blocks the channel and stops me from being able to contact a higher power is resentment and fear and, selfishness and self-obsession. I heard somebody in a meeting one time say self-everything. I love that. It's like self-obsession, self-pity, self-everything. Is what blocks it off. And now that I've felt that feeling of being that channel for somebody else, or just having that conscious contact, like, I mean, I'm fundamentally, like, I'm a drunk or a junkie. Like, I want serenity. I want peace. And so now that I've had that feeling, I have a much lower tolerance for feeling crappy now than I used to, which is one of the reasons that I do inventory.
Nice. Well, I get it, man. It's funny though, because just like what you had mentioned, I was in the same boat. Like, the first one I did, the first inventory, all this is just a brand new. I think there's a big part of me that feels like when I'm taking a newer guy through the process, it's really just about getting his feet. Like, he'll have certain, certain little awakenings or whatever, but I'm really just getting his feet moving, right? Let's just get them moving. Let's get them moving. Let's get them moving, right?
Yeah, I completely agree about that. And this is connected to the thing I said at the start about rigidity. Like, it's been in recent years, I've really been like, at first when I would see contradictions in our own literature, it used to make me uncomfortable because I felt like, they made a mistake. And now I feel more and more like, no, I think maybe they were just demonstrating that, like, we don't have to ossify the way they wrote it down exactly, which is not to say it doesn't matter how they wrote it down, but like the way that the directions are given in the big book for the 4th step is totally different from the way they're given in the 12 and 12. And I always start people in the big book. Like, I'm enough of a thumper to do the steps out of the book, especially in the beginning, and make sure they know how to do a 4-column resentment inventory and how to find those parts of self and all of that. But then we look at the 12 and 12 and hang on, I'm going to find the page in the 12 and 12 because I just love the way he puts it here.
Nice.
Okay. On page 50 in the 12 and 12, at the kind of the introduction of these questions that they're going to ask for the rest of step 4, the introduction to it is really since step 4 is but the beginning of a lifetime practice, it can be suggested that he first have a look at those personal flaws which are acutely troublesome and fairly obvious. Using his best judgment of what has been right and what has been wrong, he might make a rough survey of his conduct with respect to his primary instincts for sex, security, and society. Looking back over his life, he can readily get underway by consideration of questions such as these. And then the rest of the chapter is questions. And like, that's a pretty different approach, you know? I mean, I want people to have the skill of doing it the way we do it in the big book, because that's been the most fruitful thing for me. But I also just love this other way of looking at it, which is like, this is the beginning of a lifetime practice. Yeah. And we're trying to start with finding what's acutely troublesome and fairly obvious using our best judgment of what's been right and what's been wrong. And with the understanding for me that that's always going to improve. You know, there are harms I didn't know I'd done until a decade after I did my 4th step. And I'm sure there are harms I've done now that I don't know anything about and I won't know anything about for a while. And anyway, I just love that. It just gives a little bit more space for grace, I guess. And nice.
Yeah, that's huge. Also, like I'll tell you, so me and a group of guys with my sponsor about sometime over this last year, it's probably 8-9 months ago, I'd never been through the 12 and 12 4-step. And we had, I guess my sponsor had found something he had done in the past, and a group of us had went through it and kind of shared it in the group. And at the time, it didn't resonate real well with me. Then I went back and looked at it, and it was like, okay, I'm starting to, I experienced stuff, 6 months later where I was like, okay, this makes more sense now, right? It kind of just deepens the whole process. I love that. I love being able to just let life unfold, let it happen. Like, why not try it? Like, it's so easy to get rigid with, you got to do the steps like this. And don't get me wrong, I can get there. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's like, at the end of the day, like, there's not much freedom in that. Like how you just talked about the grace, right?
Yeah. I think this book and this literature for me are, inspired by a power greater than ourselves. Like, there are ways these fit together that I just think are kind of miraculous. And at the same time, I think that I personally have just a really human and kind of fear-based desire to like turn founders into, kings almost. Like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like, before I got sober, I knew I had a problem and I knew I might end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of my fears, was that it was a cult and I was going to be brainwashed. And of course I heard the line, which is wonderful, that like, my brain needed a scrub, and that's true. But also, one of the things that happened at my very first AA meeting was that somebody in the room, it was a book study, and they were reading a story out of the back of the big book. So it was a story of one of the early members of Alcoholics Anonymous who had really not been into the God thing, really not been into the whole higher power thing at all. And that person was, I think, maybe even the reason that we have as we understood him in the text of the steps. And as we were reading this, in this meeting, one of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous said that he thought the writer of that story was being a bit of a prick. Yeah. And I tell you what, like, I felt so welcome, so at home in that meeting, because that guy said, like, you can call your founders names. You can, I'm not saying like, anyway, I think maybe it's obvious what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, it's really important to me to not worship our founders, no matter how wonderful I think they were, and to not become so, because for me, that always comes out of fear, I guess. Yeah. It always comes out of like a fear that if I don't do it exactly right, and if I don't do it perfect, then I'm going to break it. And I kind of think that God is bigger than Alcoholics Anonymous, even. Nice. So there's room for a lot of ideas.
Very cool. That's awesome. It kind of goes to just with the whole, the application of spiritual principles, right? It's like, me and a close buddy of mine were talking not too long ago. I had a guy out on the show he's 43 years sober, and it's Bill S. You should go back and check it out. And he 43 years sober, but he doesn't believe in like any kind of supernatural being out there, right?
I love that.
And he's like, but I believe in great mystery. I believe in, he's like, he said, my sponsor told me at 6 years sober that like the place for alcohol is trying to stay sober is on his knees. Right. So he's like, I still get on my knees every day and I pray. And he'd went over, like, he kind of prays to the day. Right. And, and it's cool because it's like, like I don't know of any situation where, God or whatever you want to call it, cares what you call him, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a spiritual principle is a spiritual principle. Like if you're applying it to your life, it's like me and my sponsor always talk about. We go to the treatment center pretty often, right? And it's like, like you don't even have to believe this thing's going to work. Like I don't have to believe that eating at a caloric deficit is going to work. But if I do it, I'll lose weight. It's the application of principles and just see what happens, right? And so it's just like what, principles are principles, right? And it's so easy to, like you said, to put things or a process or people on a pedestal and get lost in all that, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I've been turning my will and my life over to like abusive partners, like before I ever found Alcoholics Anonymous, before I even found alcohol, like I was looking for something outside of myself to take over and to make decisions and to comfort me and to make me feel better and to protect me. And, I looked for it in some places that really didn't work very well. And alcohol was one of them, but it wasn't the only one. And I love that there's so little judgment about that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love that there's space for me to, have whatever relationship I have with a higher power. I do want to just real quick, I've already thrown around the word God a couple of times, and I want to say a little bit about that real quick, just because, for one thing, I got sober on the West Coast, and, I'm in Tennessee now, and Alcoholics Anonymous is the same, and alcoholics are the same, but just because of like demographics and culture, some certain topics end up sounding a little bit different in AA meetings. And one of those is meetings on step 2, coming to believe in a higher power and making peace with that. And so I heard some really cool things in those West Coast meetings. And in one of them I heard that I just love was somebody talked about turning their will and their life over to time and the natural order of things.
Nice.
Which is just like,
that's huge.
Gorgeous. I mean, I'm not even sure I mean anything different from that. I say God, it's fewer syllables, but I'm not sure it even means anything different. And then, there's a spiritual experience appendix where it talks about, like, it gives this phrase of an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. And honestly, that's probably the best, synopsis of my belief at this point, is that it's an unsuspected inner resource. But God only has one syllable, so I say that more often.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool because going to the inventory thing, that's what you start seeing. It's like, wow, like this is the best I have. Like I do a 4-column inventory, and it's like this is literally the best I could come up with. It's like I have to find something bigger than me, and
and then that's kind of the active part. I need something bigger than me, and then there's almost a passive part too for me, which is like when I just trust my sponsor, trust Alcoholics Anonymous, do what's in front of me to do, and I take that inventory, even though I don't understand it, I don't believe it'll work. If I just do it, and sure enough, bits of self start becoming clear, and some of them fall away, and some of them are very present and painful, and it takes a long time. But like, that's when I start experiencing the presence of an unsuspected inner resource, or of being connected to the natural order of things. And, after I did my 5th step, even though I found my 5th step, like, pretty much just awkward. Like, I did not feel any great insights. I probably cried, but I was also probably just like shaky and nervous the whole time. I wasn't like, I didn't feel this really spiritually profound thing. But afterwards, in that hour of going home and taking down the book and sitting and asking myself whether I've been thorough, that was really a time when I felt peace and I felt a connection. I remember sitting on my front porch and looking across the street, and it was winter, and there was a tree across the street that had no leaves on its branches, and it was nighttime, and the street light was shining through it, and it was just making these incredible circular patterns in these branches. And I just really felt something I'd never felt before. And I don't think it's because that thing came and visited me because I did such a good job on my fifth step. I think that thing is probably always available to me. And I had a clear channel for the first time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. Yeah. I love how you talked about available. Available is probably one of my favorite conceptions of the power. Yeah, I think that's it's just always like, it's so important for me when I'm talking to my guys and for me to have people around me that talk about how it's available. It's here, dude. It's here. It's always here. Thank God. Right.
Yes.
And also, like, I love how you touched on when you were talking about the St. Francis prayer. A common thing that I'll ask my guys is like, if God's right here with us, which He is, right? Is like, what would the conversation with you or him or you and your partner be, right? Like, what does that conversation go like? That's an important conversation. Like, if he's rigid, beating on stuff, acting like he's pissed off because it's not going his way, then it's going to be way different. Whether if he's forgiving, accepting, patient, loving, speaking out of love, right? And those concepts, it's kind of like, it's how do you actively, I like how you mentioned the words active and passive. It's like, how do you actively walk through this? And you also mentioned something else, and I know we're kind of all over the place, but it's just inspired me. I want to say this. There's a buddy of mine just got me into, you had mentioned vision, right? And a buddy of mine had got me into doing this thing called, he calls it the 12 daily prayers, meditation, and vision, right? And the first one, and this is just the idea of it, on page 83, it says, so we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love, right?
Yeah.
He says, meditate on what each one of those principles look like, right? Patience, meditate on what that is, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And then carry the vision of, if we're talking about family right here in this instance, it could be anybody, it could be work, coworkers or whatever, but what would it look like to carry the vision? Like when you see, your wife or when you see the coworker, what would it look like to be patient with them? Tolerance.
I love that.
Let's carry that through the day. Kindliness, love, loving. What would it look like to be loved? Loving towards them, and like actively carrying that through the day, which is, if you look at what the inventory is the complete opposite of that, right? It's like, oh man, I should say the 4-step inventory, like,
Sure.
I also add, what I packed into the day as well, which is positive stuff in a lot of ways, but, it's always like, okay, self keeps showing up, blocking this stuff from happening, right? It's not happening the way I want it, yada, yada, yada. It's me, right?
Yeah. Yes. Self-everything. Yes.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it makes me think of like, there's a spot in the 12 and 12 in step 3. And this one I'm doing from memory because I don't have enough hands to try and open the book and find it. But it's that part that talks about dependence and independence and how, connecting with a higher power is actually a means of gaining true independence of the spirit, is how I'm remembering it anyway. And I think that's a concept that I didn't really get until after my first inventory, and then sharing that with a sponsor, and taking it through the rest of the steps too, right? Like it doesn't end at 5. I take these old ideas, maladjustments. People say defects of character. I don't enjoy that phrase. I love in the 12 and 12, it says you can call it an index of maladjustments. So that's what I do, is I think of all of them as just maladjusted instincts. But anyway, I when I'm in those, I didn't know how much that stuff was ruling my life. And that's actually another way that I ended up, like, there was that guy who said that thing in a meeting, and that was one resentment that helped me get through doing my first 4-step. And then in another place, it talks about the world and its people really dominated us. That's on page 66. Like, if I'm in this place of pre-4th-step inventory, I am being dominated by the world and its people.
Yeah.
I don't even know to what extent I'm making decisions based on fear and resentment. And, the insight that I do remember, I remember a couple of things from that first 4th and 5th step. One of the most profound for me was, it was so simple, but I got sober when I was 22. I was a young woman. I was in college. I was, socially awkward, I think is a correct way to say it. I'm still a little bit socially awkward, but I've kind of found my people now. But back then I didn't even know who my people were. So I was trying to go to young people's meetings. I was trying to fit in places that just like were not right for me. And I had all of these resentments on that 4-step list. There were like all these different young women, and I had my resentments against them were for different reasons. Like, one of them, I was mad because I felt like she was always acting dumber than she was to get attention. And another one, I was mad because I didn't like the way that she wore her jeans. And I felt like she judged me for the way that I wore my jeans. And another one, I just didn't like her tone. Like, I didn't have any idea what all these people had in common until I'm doing that inventory, and I'm seeing over and over again that the part of self being impacted here is that I am afraid that they are going to get attention and love that I wish I could have. And if they get it, then there's none left for me, and I will be alone. And once I got that, oh my gosh, this is the same thing. It's not about the jeans. It's not about her tone. And once I saw how many of these people I was not seeing as people, and then I get to have that conversation with my sponsor, and I let it go as much as I can. And then I pray for it to be removed. I started, for one thing, I started realizing that each of those people that I was just seeing as like a symbol of my own unworthiness was actually a whole person, probably a really interesting person, I could actually have a conversation with them. They might have a favorite band. Like, we might enjoy the same type of coffee or something. So that was, I could see their humanity, but also I had so much more time and brain space and like emotional level-headedness available to me. I could go to a meeting without being totally thrown off by these people. And anyway, so it's a very long way of saying that, like, inventory, like letting go of stuff I didn't even realize was clogging me up, makes me available for my own life in a new way, and makes me available for relationships in a new way. And so that's independence of the spirit. I was making all these decisions that I didn't know why I was making them. I was making them based on fear and inadequacy and all kinds of self-something. And then once that stuff is cleared away, I start to be able to make actual choices based on what I wanted and what I liked. Like, I feel like it became more myself instead of less myself, but like in a healthy way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, like, and it took a minute, like, obviously it don't always clear away completely, right? And I'll tell you what I seen through the process was how much I have to find, like, the spirit, right? Like, I have, I love how, and we agnostics, how it talks about, there's a couple different places. I just read the one where it says we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which causes our failures, right? But then if you look in we agnostics, it talks about, he was there, he was a part of our makeup, right? So I love how, like, they the two distinctions between, they got self, right? And then you got, some space here for the power, right? And it's like, just kind of, you add that to some meditation, like what we were talking about earlier, and it shows up, and you're like, oh man, wow, there's an option right here. I remember the first time my current sponsor asked me, he was like, yeah, but you can either turn to self or God. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. Like, what? Because at this particular situation we were talking about, it wasn't available yet. Right. And I was like, holy crap, man. And, it started becoming available in the midst of it. I started to wake up and, awake and aware, and carrying that through the day in 10. And it was just like, wow, it's available now. Like,
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about carrying it through the day, it's like, yeah, I can't envision what it would look like to be kindly to others if I'm obsessed with whether they wear mascara better than I do. You know what I mean? Like I cannot be here. I can't be kind. I can't see other people as people if I'm constantly seeing them through the lens of how may they hurt me and how do I need to defend myself against that?
Yeah. I love that. It's funny. Josie from Florida, great speaker. He says, for myself, he's like a spiritual experience for me is just my consciousness raising to the place to where I realize there's people around me.
No, I love that. Yeah. That's amazing.
He's hilarious. It's like, I get that, right? It's like, wow.
I do too. Yeah. I mean, people as actual people instead of like reflections of my inadequacy or obstacles or, whatever.
Yeah. That's cool.
I want to bring up one thing on page 66, just because I love to pick a fight with Bill occasionally, and I realize that might not be everybody's cup of tea, and I think that's all right. But this is one piece where, I'm just going to read what it says. It's right after what I read earlier. It says, "If we were to live, we had to be free of anger." And then the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. And it talks more about that. And I would just say that for me, and thank God for good sponsorship, right? But for me, I have had to bring a little more nuance to that sentence. I have not found that a life that's free of anger for me is a healthy life. And I think that this may be one of the places where being able to see the big book as a product of a few people who were pretty similar and had fairly similar life experiences and, personalities and character defects. It is kind of interesting to me to notice that most of the examples of defects of character that Bill writes are about there are a lot of them, I would say, a notable number of them revolve around padding an expense account or having affairs. Yeah. And I just think that that's great. That's probably relatable to a lot of people. And, harboring anger is probably relatable to a lot of people. And so I think that he's right, in my opinion, from my personal experience, that when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. But I just have to make a distinction between harboring the feeling, as in
Amen.
Bringing it into my harbor and making a place for it and kind of cherishing it and loving it and petting it and feeding it and gossiping about it versus experiencing anger. I'm definitely I've found this sponsoring a lot of people, women and also people of other genders. I've found that I tend to sponsor people who have less of an anger problem and more of a not feeling as if they're allowed to experience anger problem. And so for us, it's actually kind of important. I actually heard somebody say in a meeting I don't know where this came from, but that most people come into recovery either suicidal or homicidal, and whichever one you start as, it's spiritual progress when you switch. And I think that's obviously pretty glib. But for me, I really came in pretty self-destructive and self-hating in a really overt way. And so it was actually spiritual progress for me when I started noticing the ways in which I was being harmed and experiencing anger and allowing myself to experience anger. Now, I can't harbor it. There's a lot of stuff I can't do with it. But I do, and I have found that for some of the people I sponsor, it's pretty important to develop a new relationship with anger and not to fear it.
Yeah, I love you said that. My first sponsor, he used to share with me, he said, that, after you sober up and you stay sober for a little while, your self-worth and your self-esteem start to go up, and as that stuff starts to go up, it's easier. He was like, when I first got here, you could step on my toes and I'd apologize to you,
Yes.
But I love what you're saying. And I love also the distinction between harboring and what you're saying. Cause I always have, the guy come in, new guy come in, and we're doing an inventory, and he's like, I don't know if like I'm upset. There's a big difference in harboring resentment, giving it a place to grow, right?
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
And I tell you, like it's real easy to be kind of passive and just be like, it is what it is. I'm not supposed to be angry. I'm not supposed to be angry. I'm not going to, I'm just going to push it to the side and push it to the side.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this though, like. Obviously, I believe that there's, I don't know the wording I'm looking for. I like to, going back to the passive and active, right? There's sometimes when I'm going through certain situations, right? If I can be understanding of a person, right? I may get pissed off about something that's going on, right? There's been times in my recovery where I was passive and just like, it's okay, no big deal. And then also like me and a sponsor was reading, I think we were reading The Family After, actually. And in The Family After, it's real easy to take some of Bill's stuff right there as like being passive, the family being passive, right? And I can see how that is can be portrayed like that, but at the same time, like I think it's more of a being active, like carrying the spirit, like a loving spirit through the day, right?
Yeah.
To where like I can allow some of the same stuff to happen in my life and it have like the loving spirit flowing through me and it be completely different versus me just being passive and getting used like a freaking floor mat, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I completely agree with that. And it's kind of interesting to notice for myself how like there used to be a lot of situations where I maybe was being harmed and I wouldn't feel entitled to my own anger. I would feel like that's wrong. I shouldn't take up space, whatever. I've done a lot of damage and I've permitted a lot of damage to be done to me in that way. And then, the pendulum swung for me to anger for a while, to really getting in touch with it. And I do, for me personally, and for a lot of women, honestly, that I've worked with, I've seen that seems to be an important phase for us spiritually, that we do get angry about some of the harm that's been done to us. Wow. And then I have found that without me trying, I stopped trying to suppress my own anger and have just found that I don't have very much of it anymore. And it's like all these other areas in AA where I get healed in the area I'm not looking at. You know what I mean? Like if I'm over here, I'm not focused on trying to stop being an angry person. That never worked for me. It was like trying to force myself to accept something or forgive somebody. Like I've never been able to will myself into doing those things. But if I can instead attend a meeting, have a home group, have a service commitment, do my service commitment, have a sponsor, work with others. Like if I keep doing that stuff and trying to practice spiritual principles, then over time, I find myself being healed in areas of myself that I wasn't even paying attention to. And I'm honestly realizing as we're talking that anger is one of these, because there are lots of situations where people I sponsor will say to me, I'm so full of rage about this. And I'll say, yeah, I hear that. Yeah. I can imagine being that way too. And then I just realize that it's not in me. I don't have that rage and I haven't suppressed it. And I'm not okay with whatever it is. But I don't find myself eaten up by it anymore the way I used to be.
Wow, nice. Yeah, I need to have this conversation. There's a family member of mine. I'm not going to mention any specifics, but it was a family member of mine, real close to me, and this individual has been full of rage for quite a while now, and. I have to go into prayer with a lot of it because there's a side of me that's like, almost wanting to be like, oh, it's not supposed to be that way. And I just have to learn how to like turn towards a loving, spirit and, I get it. Yeah.
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 I don't know how much longer we have to talk, but I want to make sure I talk about a couple of like other inventory formats, if that's all right, that I've run across over the years.
We got till you're ready to stop. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about myself literally forever. So Well, so, I said early on, like, I really, I got my foundations in Alcoholics Anonymous, like, in a pretty rigid group, honestly. Like, we were really, it was really good for me that we, like, the format. I can of course say the format by heart. It was a 6-day-a-week meeting. It met at 7 a.m. and I was there every day. And we said this 3rd-step prayer aloud as part of the opening format, and we said the 7th-step prayer aloud as part of the closing format. So I knew those by heart really early. And anyway, so I had a pretty good foundation in the Big Book and the 12 and 12. And so that's where I learned how to take inventory. So when I did my first 4th step, I did a resentment inventory as it's outlined in the Big Book. And that was, 4 columns, I'm resentful at, and then the cause and the parts of self. And then the 4th column for me, I titled my mistakes. And that's where we look for selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, those other, and then, like, did I slash their tires, or like, is there anything else I did? Yeah. And then a fear inventory is part of that in the Big Book. And then there's a sex conduct inventory. And I noticed in the sex conduct inventory, I mean, I've always, I did it the way it was written in the Big Book. And so the direction on page 69, is we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? And so that's how I did. And then I answered all the questions in the 12 and 12, just kind of as like a casting a net. Like, is there anything else that's bothering me? So that's how I did it. And that's how I teach other people to do it. But over the years, I've heard people, I've heard some other cool inventory formats, and 2 of them have been especially useful to me. One of them I was guided through by a sponsor, and another one somebody shared about in a meeting not too long ago. And so that one first, that piece I just read from the sex conduct inventory that begins with we reviewed our own conduct over the years past, like, that's not really specific to sex. You can ask those questions about anything. And somebody shared in a meeting that he had been taught to take inventory of his relationship with God using those questions. Nice. And to take inventory of old ideas using those questions. Nice. And other people might already have been doing that for a long time, but somehow that's the first I've ever heard of that. And so, I've done that recently. It's just felt like a new open door in my inventory process. I really connect for some reason with old ideas. Like, when I can put an old idea into words, it's much easier for me to see it as a lie than if I'm thinking of it as a defect. And so, like, if I notice that I have an old idea, like, I grew up in a household where whichever person cooks, that person doesn't have to clean the dishes. And it's such a simple idea. It's just what I grew up with. That was just the rule. So I thought that's how everybody did it. Yeah. Well, now I'm in a marriage where my partner didn't grow up in a house with that rule. And so now it becomes clear that, that's an old idea. Yeah. That's not a truth. Yeah. And so I can take inventory of that old idea. Like, I can write at the top of a page, the person who didn't cook cleans the dishes. And then I can ask, where related to this idea have I been selfish? Yeah. Where have I been dishonest? Where have I been inconsiderate? And I get to look at, like, I've been dishonest in that I'm applying this in my marriage when I never talked about that with my spouse. That's dishonest of me, assuming that they would agree to that. Yeah. Where have I been selfish? I mean, I have assumed that my ideas should be the ideas that we live by. And anyway, I've just loved that. It's been a new way to look at inventory for me. Yeah,
that's huge. That's awesome. It's similar to the principles, right? Like the principles inventory. Have you ever, there's Pat T, a guy named Pat T does a principles inventory workshop. And
nice.
He's from San Diego. He's part of there's a Big Book Awakening group out there.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And but he talks about that. I'll tell you, like, I love how you just mentioned that. I love how naturally, when I did a 4-column inventory, naturally some of this stuff just automatically showed up, right? It was one of those situations where, like, for example, I started seeing how I held resentments towards not necessarily people. There were people that I loved dearly, but there were, like, whole like I was prejudiced against like rich people for a while, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I work around rich people, right? And I hate to say rich people, I shouldn't say that, but people with a lot of money, right? Anyways,
Sure.
like, so I would see that like I'm in this big fancy neighborhood and people won't even look at you, right? Like I'm like the scum of the earth, right? And there was also other principles, like the principle of being entitled, like young kids that was entitled. There would be situations where it was like, I loved the person dearly, but like their attitude when they felt like the world owed them something would just piss me off, right? And it was the principle. I started seeing how like, holy crap, it's an old idea, right? It's old ideas and just principles. And so I love that you just talked about the old idea inventory. That's good stuff. Yeah, a buddy of mine, one of the principles that he would talk about was he had this old idea that children are to be to just to they're not supposed to talk, they're not to be heard, just do as we say, and he'd carried that around into his adult life, right? What's some stuff that, just like what you said, what's some other stuff that got revealed to you through the old idea process?
I mean, honestly, I find that I'm going to go into talking about 6 and 7 now, but for some reason, I find that when I can get in an inventory to putting an old idea into words, it's so much easier to let go of, right? Like 6 and 7 could be one step. And I think maybe they originally were in the first version of the steps. I don't know. You might know, a big book historian would know the answer to that. But, it turned into 2 steps, and one of them is just getting ready to let go of something, and then asking to have it removed. And I've found that, I can identify something as a defective character all day long. I can identify gossip, for example, and I can say, I want this to be removed. I'm going to pray. I'm going to try real hard to be ready to let go of this. And then I'm going to ask to have it removed. But for some reason, it's hard for me to stop doing it anyway. I can ask and I can try my hardest, and I don't think it's just because I love gossip. I think that there's something in it, or I don't know, maybe it is, maybe that's an excuse, but if I can land instead on an old idea, like one of the ones that I uncovered at some point that I just found myself, it was like one of those clear as a bell thoughts that drops into my mind from, a mysterious who knows place, an unsuspected inner resource. And it was, I would rather be lonely than embarrassed.
Wow.
And I I didn't know that about myself, but it made a lot of sense of my social behavior. Like if I thought there was anything I might not be perfect at, any chance I might make a mistake, any chance I might not fit in, I would just not go. I would just leave. Wow. I would abandon groups of people and relationships. And because I was so intolerant of being embarrassed. And once I see that that's the judgment I have set up, is that I would rather be lonely than be embarrassed. I can see, oh my gosh, embarrassed is just obviously an ego word. And like, if I can see it written out in that way, it's so much easier for me to let go of in 6. And so I think for me, identifying old ideas is sometimes more helpful than making a list of my defects, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because there's that one line in 6 in the big book that says, are we now ready to let God remove all which we've omitted are objectionable. The objectionables, right? Like that right there changed the thing. Like if I'm not doing inventory on a pretty regular basis, like if something's bothering me, if something keeps bothering me over and over, let's inventory it, right? Yeah. And if I'm not doing that, I don't see that it's objectionable. I'm unconscious of whatever is going on, right? And I'll tell you, I shouldn't say this, but it's just the truth. Like I hate talking about this, but I don't hate talking about it. I like talking about it. I just feel like it's going to scare people off, right? But I'm a Christian, right? I'm a Christian in a non-Christian kind of way, if that even makes sense. I'm not in a non-religious, I should say non-religious type of way. But I'll tell you what really changed the game for me was like when I would read some of the parables, and just like what you were talking about earlier with the St. Francis prayer, right? When I started seeing those loving conceptions of a power, right? Like I love, like, whenever I like doing nightly review, for example, like if you do nightly review and you're honest about certain situations, when you see the ones that keep coming up and keep coming up, you realize you just don't got it in you, right? Like, I don't have it in me to actually be the person that my heart desires, husband or coworker or family member or whatever. It's like, sometimes I'm just extremely selfish, right? And it's like, man, I gotta find some kind of something bigger than me that's able to do it, right? And the reason I consider myself a Christian is because the Holy Spirit is available. It's like that's changed the game for me, right? And I don't want to get too far into that, but it's like, if you look at what Christ did, which is just walking around loving on people, right? And it's like, man, how is that even possible? Well, it's not. I got to find something that's possible to make it do it, right? Or, right? Like,
I mean, I love that you said it's not.
it's not possible.
That's divine. Is what that is.
Yeah, it's like, I don't have the power. It goes back to the personal powerlessness. If you look at the defects, what is the defects? Or what'd you call them earlier? Not the defect. What'd you call it?
Maladjustments.
Maladjustments. I'm seeking power. I'm seeking power through some kind of, some place, some space, like some self showing up all over the place. I'm seeking power. Don P used to always talk about, he was like, I seen at a real young age that I could lie at school and act like I was sick, and they'd send me home. And I seen there was power in it, right? And like, as you get older, you start to sober up. You start to find out, first off, you got to find some kind of power greater than yourself, because clearly you don't have it, right?
Yeah.
You go through this process and you're like, holy crap, like, this is causing me problems and all the people around me problems, right? And like, when I start seeing, like, man, this is objectionable now I'm starting to, it's funny, because just because I started seeing it was objectionable didn't mean I didn't keep it, or even want to keep it around for a little bit, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It was just a game changer. If you don't see that it's causing problems, like, you're not going to try to, I often wonder, like, what is not objectionable in my life that I'm living from on a pretty regular basis that I should probably find pretty objectionable. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think the way gets clearer over time, right? I've heard people say that, the road narrows, and my sponsor says instead the road gets clearer, which I just love. I love that anyway. But yeah, there's stuff there's stuff I became aware of early on, wasn't able to let go of for a very long time. And there's stuff I'm still probably not aware of. And I love that there are so many different ways to be inspired and to relate to a higher power. Like, I'm not a Christian. I'm almost everything except a Christian, probably.
Yeah. Me too.
And,
Me too.
But like, there's so much, like, when I think about, like, times and ways that I feel conscious contact, whatever that means to me, like, really, when I feel relief from the bondage of self, for me, it's like in words a lot of the time. So it can be like mystic poets, or it can be teachings from who knows, or, and sometimes it's a sensory experience, like wind for some reason. Anyway,
nice.
Not to go too far into what that feels like, but the point is conscious contact, and like having, and like, like it says in the 12 and 12 too, like in the 6th step, like having a direction to aim, like being willing to aim towards something, and even knowing that I'm not going to achieve it, being willing to aim toward perfection, whatever that looks like for me. I think is pretty beautiful.
I love that, man. My first sponsor we use the word lean. We're gonna let's lean in that direction. I love that.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's so
funny.
Gentle.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, I am the furthest thing from a Christian. Okay, when I say that, like, I was so I came into AA, and I was I had huge resentments against Christianity. I still do in some ways, right? In some ways,
sure, some
old ideas and stuff, and I got into a lot of Buddhism. I tell you, like, I have a relationship with the Holy Spirit is what I call it. But at the same time, like, most of my thoughts are extremely influenced by, like, Buddhist thought and
sure,
and mindfulness meditation and different things like that. And so I love how you talked about how it just could be just a sensory thing, right?
Yeah. I'm not mad at you for like being a Christian, even in part, right? Like there's room for all of us, which is gorgeous. And that's a huge religious tradition in the United States. Like there needs to be room in Alcoholics Anonymous for people who find God there. And I think that's beautiful. I think for me, I really didn't have a religion when I came into AA. I didn't have a history with a religion. So I didn't have a lot of baggage around religion, which is nice. I didn't have a lot of baggage around the word God. Well, yes, I did, but it was intellectual self-sufficiency and pride rather than, religious trauma. But, there's some stuff in We Agnostics that I find annoying. And there's some stuff in We Agnostics that is life-changing for me. Like the places where it talks about the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. Yeah, here it is. We found that page 46, we found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. Nice. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. I mean, that's the foundation for me. And then that's led me in a lot of directions, and I've done a lot of study and I do have a religion now, but it, my foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous just is having a higher power. I think sometimes so I did martial arts when I was in high school. And I had a friend who was like demonstrating, I think a Hapkido principle at some point. It's like basically the idea that flow of energy and like working with the energy that exists is more powerful than strength and standing against it. And he had me straighten out my arm with my palm up and put my kind of forearm across his shoulder. And he put his hands in the crook of my elbow and pulled it. He was like, now as hard as you can, flex against me and, resist me, keep your arm straight. And he was taller and bigger and stronger than I was. And he pulled my elbow down and bent pretty easily. And then he said, do the same thing, same position, arm up. And this time just visualize, just imagine, rather than going against me, visualize a flow of energy coming from your shoulder through the end of your fingertips, like calm, steady, sure. And he did the same thing. And my arm bent much less. And I don't believe that he was, I don't think he was just putting that on. I mean, it really looked to me like he was trying harder. So I don't know, maybe he's a better actor. But anyway, to me, that's the same thing as a higher power. That could be my higher power. It's just the idea that energy flows and that cooperating with it is better than flexing against it. There you go. That would work just fine in AA.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because it goes into when we were talking about conceptions of the power, right? How I actually started to trust that there was something, some kind of power kind of working was, I started seeing there's laws of the universe, right? It's like life moves. Yeah. I still to this day feel life moves in a certain current. There's a current going on. It keeps going. There's a certain direction. And when you apply principles to your life, you're moving with the current, right? You're flowing with it, right? And if you look at fear and, all this other stuff is kind of fighting against it, and it's just exhausting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and religions, many religions and spiritual, houses or constructs or whatever seem to have in common those spiritual principles. And they're basically the same ones that AA is built on, right? Amen. That look at what's keeping me from connecting and look at what's making me think I'm separate from others, better than or less than, and try to let go of that and then try to serve others. That's all of them. I don't know if it's all of them, but gosh, a whole lot of them have. And when I live by those principles, my life gets better, even when I'm not paying attention or making it happen by force. Yeah,
I agree. It's interesting because I'd studied several different religions over the years, and it's important. I guess the ones that have similar things in common, you should probably pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
There's on,
or take the scientific approach, how it has to meet the acid test. How well does it work? Well, just try living by those spiritual, forget the God thing for a while and try doing the stuff in here that's not explicitly about God and ignore the rest and see what happens. You still have to serve others. You still have to show up and be a part of a community and try to think less of self. And I want to share the last inventory format, and then after that, you can pick the timing for the end of the conversation. But I don't want to miss this. So the last inventory format I want to share is, this is one that I was guided through by a sponsor some years ago, and I don't know where she got it, but it starts kind of similarly to a resentment inventory, but the idea is that it's a conflict rather than a resentment. It could be a resentment, but it could be some other kind of conflict. And so, I'm having a conflict with so-and-so, and then like, what is the conflict is column 1. And I can describe that however I want to describe that. And then column 2 was my reaction. So what did I do? And how, and what do I think? Like, what ideas come up in that conflict? And then column 3 is old ideas that seem to be present here. And then column 4 is new ideas. Like if I say a prayer between 3 and 4, does a new idea come up? And the example for me with that one was a relationship I had with a partner who, the conflict was like, he believes certain types of things about roles in a relationship, and I find it really offensive and upsetting. And then what's my reaction? Well, I've never told him that I find it upsetting. And I've never once spoken up, right? Because then I look at old ideas. Well, my job is to make my partner happy. My job is to stay quiet, be peaceful, not make waves. And then I say a prayer and I get to new ideas. And then I find that what ends up like coming out of my pen is my job is to be who God made me to be. Wow. That's it.
Wow.
It was totally transformative. I had no idea that I had been responding to the conflict in that way. So I like that format gets at how have I responded to this, and then looks for the old ideas. And I use that a lot, especially. I also find it a little bit more gentle sometimes.
That's huge, yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow, that's cool. I really, really like that. I tell you, like, I hear people talk about 4 column, 5 column, 6 column. I've heard all kinds of, right? And I tell you, I do a 4 column inventory, but usually, like, I get to a place of what would God have me be at the end, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people I've heard say they do a 5th column and they put that on there. And, but I love how, what did you say on this one? What'd you end it with? What
new ideas.
Yeah. And that's what God would have me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's huge, right? And I'll tell you, there's a shift that happens in that, whenever I start seeing how, like, I'm playing God, I had to quit playing God, and it didn't work, and that shift that happens. I love how, in 3, how it talks about, what does it say? It says, first requirement is that we be convinced any life run on self-will could hardly be a success, right? And when you get into some of this inventory like this, you start seeing like, oh, that's what it's talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what that means is like self-will is flexing, right? Self-will is, and I might be trying to do something great. I might be trying to be kind. I might be trying to help somebody. Sure. I mean, my most embarrassing 6 and 7 step story is when I was trying to help people without their permission or request. And I realized I couldn't stop myself from doing it. I followed this woman from our meeting to the bus station, like several blocks, trying to talk her out of going home and drinking. And the whole time I was talking to myself, the whole time I was like, I wasn't going to do this. Like I had said the 7th step prayer about this maladjustment. I had said it. I had asked to stop helping people who didn't ask me for my help. And there I was just doing it. And I got on the bus with her. And then I got back off the bus before the bus left the station. And I told that to a friend of mine at the time, and she laughed at me pretty hard. And then she said, hey, you can chalk that up under spiritual progress that you got off the bus.
There you go.
But like, that's the experience sometimes. Like that's me trying to flex and trying to make myself stop doing it before I was ready. And I actually think that by doing something so obviously out of control and embarrassing for me, like I really wasn't going to do, I was determined not to do it. And then I just did it. And the whole time I was aware I was doing it and I couldn't stop. And that's what made me actually ready to like go back to 6 and truly be ready to let it go. And surprise, surprise, I've done much less of it since then. It was actually able to be lifted after that.
Nice. Yeah. That's huge. That's awesome. It's interesting how like sometimes you just got to go through stuff, right? Thank God for transparency, right? Thank God.
Absolutely.
Thank God for it. We were talking not too long ago about how it's the transparency my sponsor shows me that's like really changes things. I'm able to talk to him. I'm able to open up to him more. He shares his experiences with me, shares his life. And, I've had people that I looked up to in the past, but that were like, had like a huge level of like righteousness, and it was hard for me to share with them. It's like, it's hard for me to share with people when I feel like they're not going to accept me or understand, right? It's like, man.
Yeah, it's hard to relate to people who don't seem to have any vulnerabilities. It's like really, it brings out my fear.
Yeah. Man. I love these. So how did you find that one you just shared with us? Was that just something that your sponsor came up with over the years? Yeah. That's cool.
I don't know where she got it. She sponsored me for like 2 months. Wow. And then I don't, and I know her name, but her email address doesn't work anymore. So, Peggy, if you're out there,
nice.
Let me know where you got that. I don't know.
That's cool. That's good stuff. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. This has been awesome.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me to do it. This is really fun.
Yeah, I would like to possibly talk about doing like at the beginning of the year, like doing some stuff periodically. And
sure.
We'll come up with some ideas, and we'll talk about it, and also let's pray and find out what we want to do for next week's episode. And I'm sure it'll be freaking awesome. Yeah.
That sounds good. I'm sure I have many more opinions available to me.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. So stay on here real quick. I'm going to do this quick little disclaimer. I'll be right back. Yeah, thank everyone for listening.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.